After the first week of NFL action, we're able to see what players are looking good out there, what players aren't looking so good, who's getting the snaps, who isn't getting the snaps. And today, Jeff Bell and I, we're going to talk about some of our biggest risers and fallers after this first week of football. Now, Jeff, let me ask you kind of an open-ended question before we start talking about specific player names here. How much weight do we put in week one? And I know that's like a very broad question, but I wrote about this in my Risers and Fallers episode that, like, on one hand, you got last year where we fell for this trap with Isaiah Likely, who was the top scoring tight end in week one. And then over the rest of the season was borderline tight end 3, basically. On the flip side, last year we saw Jaden Daniels, Baker Mayfield, both give us top 3 week one performances and then finish as league winning QB1. So how do we separate what's real from what's fake in this first week of football?
I really look at it as, so take the Bengals, for example. Do I think that the Bengals are going to struggle on offense all year long and just be a mess? No, I don't. I think that we know what we're dealing with there. They just had a bad game.
Right.
Meanwhile, I think when you're looking at some reveals like Jaxon Smith-Njigba playing with Sam Darnold and that new offense in Seattle, we didn't know what that was going to look like. And what we saw on the first take of it was just a massive target share there. And the Browns with Harold Fannin, we weren't sure what the Browns with Joe Flacco, Harold Fannin offense would look like. And what we got was this hybrid slot player moving all around. And so I think that when you're looking at new players that have arrived into a new situation or new coaches, those types of things, uncertainty about ambiguous backfields or ambiguous target trees, those types of things, I put a lot of weight into week one, and I put equal weight into week two, because so often we see this was what happened in week one. Week two is the complete opposite. Meanwhile, an established team like the Bengals, they're going to have better days. I'm pretty confident about that. I think that the Lions, I'm pretty confident they'll have better days, despite that
The
kind of
confidence
straddles the
level
line a little bit,
is
because
a little bit higher than the
you
Lions,
do
but
lose.
yes.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
yes, but you do lose Ben Johnson off of. But what did we see from the Bengals last year? They lost their offensive coordinator, and the first two games were pretty rough for the Bengals last year. Jamar
The
Chase was
first
like wide
6
receiver
games were pretty
42
rough.
through the first two, and then that clicked in there. That offense figured it out. The offense was better. It was just that they couldn't stop a nosebleed. But that's where I think new situations put a lot of weight in what we see, because we were just operating off speculation. We didn't know what it was going to be.
Yeah. And I will say that a lot of the biggest risers and fallers are going to be running backs. We're not going to talk about any running backs on this show if you're listening on YouTube or if you're listening via podcast. We did a monster episode yesterday, an hour and 45 minutes, talking about every single NFL backfield, all the risers, all the fallers, all the guys that we're kind of watching to see what'll happen in week two. So today we're going to focus on quarterbacks, tight ends, wide receivers. But if you want some really deep running back analysis, we did that just yesterday. Wherever you listen to us, you can find that if you look back one day. Let's go ahead and jump in, Jeff. And I think the biggest one that kind of surprises me is Daniel Jones as a riser. I think a lot of people looked at him as just the backup to Anthony Richardson, that once he kind of had his opportunity with the New York Giants and it didn't pan out there, that was just the end of the road for him. And then he was just destined to be a career backup after that. But here he is looking unbelievably sharp. And a lot of this, sure, they played against the Miami Dolphins. And I don't want to overreact to a game against a team that just looks like they're already ready for spring break. That being said, Daniel Jones scored a lot of points. He punched in 2 touchdowns. He was thrown with pinpoint accuracy all over the field. And I just can't stop thinking about the fact that Daniel Jones was a QB1 in fantasy a few years ago, thrown to Isaiah Hodgins, Richie James, and Darius Slayton. And now I look at where he's playing with Michael Pittman and Tyler Warren and Jonathan Taylor. This is such a better offensive environment. Are you buying into this? Do you think that Daniel Jones can be just like a plug and play QB1 this year?
I hesitate to go to plug and play QB1, but I am buying into it, because we've seen him, just like you said, we've seen him put it together. And what does Shane Steichen say in his press conference when he announced that Daniel Jones was going to be the quarterback? He said in 2022, he had a pretty good season. And I think that
Right?
they're seeing the things that he's able to do. We know he can run the ball, and that's a big cheat code that gets unlocked for quarterbacks, his ability to run the ball. And it's beyond just getting the 2 tush push touchdowns. We know he can add on the ground. And you're exactly right. You look at the talent that he was playing with previously relative to what he has now, it's a night and day difference. And so I could buy into it on it working out. And outside of Houston, within that divisional matchup, they're Jacksonville, they should be able to take advantage of Jacksonville's
Mhm.
defense. Tennessee should be similar. So they have some favorable matchups there. They have a tough one this week. And I think it's going to be a true litmus test seeing them against the Broncos because we do know what that Broncos defense is.
Yeah, I agree with you, and you do talk about the rushing, and that's something that I think people don't think of Daniel Jones as a rusher, but he had over 700 rushing yards and 7
Yeah.
touchdowns that year that he finished as the overall QB9. And Shane Steichen's offense, we know what he did with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia, and we saw what he was trying to accomplish with Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis. Now, I don't put Daniel Jones on that level of rusher, but he's like 80% of what they can do on the ground, and that alone opens up so many more opportunities. So this is one, I moved him way, way up my rankings because one, I think he's done enough to solidify this job. Even if Anthony Richardson does get healthy and starts looking good in practice, now he's got a higher hurdle to clear to get back on the field. So Daniel Jones right now, like, what do you think he costs in superflex leagues? Second round pick, late second. I don't think you're getting him for a third, but like if you need some quarterback depth, I'd be more than happy to give away a second round pick for Daniel Jones, a guy who can average, 18 points per game this year.
Yeah, if you're going for Daniel Jones, and it would be a second for me because I would expect that that would be a later second that I would be giving up for him. I don't know that I'm quite there on a rebuilding team going for Daniel Jones,
Right.
but maybe we should be. And I think that that's the other thing that gets unlocked sometimes. You look at Sam Darnold, or you look at a Geno Smith, or you look at a Baker Mayfield.
Justin
That
Fields.
these guys, yeah, not that long ago, these guys were completely written off
Mhm.
afterthoughts when it comes to being a franchise quarterback. And it really only takes at that quarterback position, if you've got the pedigree that Daniel Jones does, it takes putting it together for a year. And that's going to at least give you another year. And you start to stack a couple of years, and all of a sudden you're in the Baker Mayfield position. And franchise is saying, this is our guy. And Daniel Jones could very much do that with Indianapolis.
I think that's such a great like comparison to Sam Darnold and the Baker Mayfield because that's about where he's valued now, and now he's going to start rising up. But if he plays well and he gets what Baker Mayfield got in Tampa Bay, a 3-year, $100 million extension, then it is just going to be wheels up from here on out. So yeah, definitely trying to buy Daniel Jones. I don't want to overreact too much to it being a game against Miami, but he's a guy in startups this offseason I was targeting for really, really cheap and pretty happy to see him looking good in this offense. Next guy we got to talk about, I don't know how much there is for Jaxon Smith-Njigba to rise because I think he is a consensus top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty right now. But I think the question we need to ask here, Jeff, is has he elevated himself into that Malik Neighbors tier where we see like Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Jamar Chase just kind of in a tier of their own as the top three? And I know when I was doing my Dynasty rankings this offseason, I had this Malik Neighbors tier. It was literally just Malik Neighbors by himself as the wide receiver four. I think it's time to start talking about putting Jaxon Smith-Njigba up there. We know he's got the pedigree, a 59% target share in week one, getting all of the usage we want to see in a Clint Kubiak offense. How high is the ceiling for JSN?
Yeah, I give you the props here because you were on this and it took me a little while to get around to it. I did kind of get there and viewing it as really just a cheap version of Amon-Ra St. Brown, especially a couple of years ago with Amon-Ra St. Brown before they had added Sam Darnold or Sam Laporta, before they had added Jameson Williams, and it was just the Amon-Ra St. Brown show. I think that's what we're dealing with here with Jaxon Smith-Njigba. We know what that target share was off week one. The volume is going to be there, especially PPR formats. The volume is going to be there to say he is in that Malik Neighbors tier. And I think that Sam Darnold, for all his warts, he's capable of elevating Jaxon Smith-Njigba for fantasy purposes.
So I don't want to push back too hard because I do like a good Amon St. Brown comp. He's a smaller guy who plays out of the slot, but I think that undersells his skill set a little
It
bit.
does.
Yeah, I think Amon St. Brown, was a lot of short targets across the middle of the field, allowing him to create after the catch. What we saw here was JSN running vertical routes, running deep
Yeah.
crossers. And what I talked about in the offseason is the history of Clint Kubiak, wide receiver ones. I look back last year, we saw it was a kind of a carousel in New Orleans, but whether it was Rashid Shaheed or Chris Olave or Marquez Valdez-Scantling, they were all looking good. And then you look back 2 years ago when Clint Kubiak was in San Francisco, Brandon Ayuk had the best year of his career. You flash all the way back to 2021, it was Justin Jefferson's second year in the league, and that was when he had his career year at the time, which is now his second best year of his career. But still, I went back and I started looking at the pass charts from these guys, and pattern recognition, a lot of similarities here where you see the big vertical routes down the sidelines, you see the crossers as well, and then you also see a handful of gimmies that just get the ball to him and allow him to create after the catch. Obviously, he's not going to be pulling a 59% target share for the rest of the year. But I was talking with Alfredo Brown earlier today on the fantasy football show, and I said, I think we could set the over under for target share at like 35% because Cooper Kupp looks like absolute dust at this point. Torrey Horton not really getting on the field that much. We saw him playing out of a lot of 12 personnel, but when they drop back, I mean, Sam Darnold is just laser focused on getting the ball to JSN.
Well, it's playing to what you have. You have Sam Darnold at quarterback. You're trying to make things easy for him, but you also want to be a physical run first football team. And so having multiple tight ends on the field, having a smash mouth run offense, protecting Sam Darnold
Mm-hmm.
so he's not worrying about the ghost, and then allowing Jaxon Smith-Njigba to just get him open, and having that confidence in the Kluge offense to be able to create open space for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. We saw similarities. Cooper Kupp's on the same team, and there had been a lot of talk about this offense. So many roots of this offense having Cooper Kupp having the background and Sam Darnold having the background, and that's where they're picking this up. And you think a couple years ago, what did Cooper Kupp do in this offense with Matt Stafford at quarterback? He set a bunch of NFL records, and so that's what we could be looking at with Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
Let's stay in the same draft class. Just 2 picks after Jaxon Smith-Njigba, we saw Zay Flowers go off the board, and we're so impatient, Jeff. Not we, the royal we. Just people are so impatient. Like we got spoiled for a couple of years with Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Chase, and these guys just coming in and immediately giving us wide receiver one production. That we forget that it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about the year 3 breakout. Like that's what we were really looking for, and now we see some really good, talented wide receivers entering year 3, Zay Flowers being one of those guys. And this is something that I'm just going to steal from you, Jeff. You say it all the time. Like we see the breakout from a young receiver and we say, well, that was great. He broke out and that's his ceiling. But what if there's another ceiling and another ceiling and another ceiling and another ceiling? Like guys can continue getting better. And Zay Flowers is a young first round pick on one of the best offenses in the NFL. And last year we did see, a lot of good usage. Like he was getting a lot of targets, but they weren't really high value targets. And what we saw in week 1 was Zay Flowers running deep vertical routes, getting very high value touches, and not the ball getting spread around quite as much. He was very much so the focal point of the passing attack. So Zay Flowers, for me, a pretty significant riser in value.
Yeah, it really comes into the progression of a receiver that, yeah, yes, there are the Jamar Chases that immediately, Malik Neighbors, like is that like immediately you can do that. But a lot of the time, you kind of figure out what you have in the young player, and then you're able to reset in the offseason and come back and be like, okay, we think he can handle this role. And then he absolutely crushes that role, and you get another reset. And going into year 3, you're like, okay, let's full blown wide receiver one. Let's put it on him. Let's give him that target share. Let's allow him to ascend, really. And I think that so much of the pushback on Zay Flowers, people look and they see, well, Baltimore's not a pass heavy offense. I mean, Lamar Jackson did throw for 40 touchdowns and 4,000 yards last year. So, but a lot of that was a very efficient usage. But I think that the thought it was that they've got Mark Andrews, they've got Isaiah Likely. We saw Rashad Bateman break out. They've got to involve all these guys. There's just not going to be the volume for Zay Flowers. I think the reality of when you're looking at an NFL offense is if you've got a number one wide receiver, you're going to give him the volume. That's how it's going to work. And that's what they did in this first week against Buffalo. They said Zay Flowers is our number one receiver. We're going to treat him like a number one receiver, and all the other pieces fall off and we see that happen.
Yeah, and I think that, the progression for Zay Flowers, like it's pretty obvious now in hindsight because if you remember, like at Boston College, this guy, he was not exclusively, but so much of his production came as a downfield threat where he was just getting way behind defenses, making these big plays. And then when we saw him in the NFL, it was a completely different role where he was just like very much so like this dink and dunk receiver for the first like 10 games or so of his career. And we said, this is weird. Like, this isn't what Zay Flowers did. And then in the second half of his rookie season, they kind of allowed him to blow the top off of defenses and do exactly what he did in college. And we said, this is great. Now he can win deep. He can win short. He can win intermediate. He can do all of the things. And then in year 2, we did see him doing all of the things where he was running all over the field, doing all this stuff. But like you said, the ball was getting spread a little bit thin. He was just averaging less than 7 targets per game. But then we see him come out now in week 1, still doing all of the things, deep, short, intermediate, outside, inside, doing a little bit of everything. But now he is doing that on 9 targets a game, which in a low volume offense 47% target share in week one. I mean, that was second only to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So now we've seen this developmental plan where they kind of slowly just kept putting more on his plate, and then they grew his role a little bit, and now he can do it all, and he's the focal point of the offense. I mean, sky's the limit. Like, he is a very, very good player, and I don't see a lot of other competition in, like, he just seems tiers better than every other pass catcher in Baltimore at this point.
Yeah. So CeeDee Lamb, when CeeDee Lamb was first in Dallas,
Yep, I know
I'm
where you're
going
going.
to he started out exclusively in the slot.
Yeah.
It was like all he did was in the slot. All he did, and they had Amari Cooper, they had Michael Gallup outside, CeeDee Lamb only in the slot. Then the next year he came back only outside. He only played outside. That was all they did, and we saw there was a big jump in his yards per reception, those kind of numbers, the target areas. It was year 4 that we got that massive breakout where they finally moved him everywhere. They just moved him all over the field. They played him inside. They played him outside. They moved him all through formation. And I think that happens so often on these players that we see the immediate production and think like, well, they've arrived. And just like you said, the level building the levels on top of it, and that's where you can get into the 1,700-yard seasons that CeeDee Lamb put up. I mean, I'm not there that Zay Flowers is going to post a 1,700-yard season, but I do think
I
that Zay
might be there
Flowers
on
is
JSN.
probably no, but I think both of these guys, I saw you today tweeting about buying high on some of these players, and I think that both of these guys are buy highs right now.
Absolutely. Let's keep moving down the list and hand up. I forgot how good Deebo Samuel is when he's healthy. Battling pneumonia last year, dealing with some injuries. Now all of a sudden he comes out healthy, rejuvenated, and it's just like, wow. I feel like I'm watching 2021 film of Deebo Samuel again, playing aggressively, running through defenders, just smashing his way and will not be denied when he gets near the end zone. And, egg on my face. What a fool I was for fading Deebo Samuel. I don't know what else there is to say on him. He looks really good, and he is a big, big riser for me after week one.
I did not fade Deebo Samuel, and I'm trying to bring up my where I ended up being on him because I was in there. Let's see here, where did I end up? I'm gonna find. This is where I find out that I was +2 on him for the season long, so that even feels a little bit low.
I think I was like
But
-8. So congratulations, Jeff. You were right. I was wrong. I'm stupid. You're smart. We get it.
we don't play that game. We don't play that game. No. But I think that when you look at just the offensive structure, and we had a lot last year downfield with Terry McLaurin, and then Terry McLaurin missed camp. That's kind of a little bit of an issue. I think that we've seen that pop up with some players in the past that they miss camp, and then especially the first couple of weeks can be tough to get connected there. But what is open when Terry McLaurin is attacking vertically? You've got all the underneath, and they use Zach. Why am I blanking on Zach Ertz?
Second,
They've
yeah.
used him underneath. Yeah, they used him underneath last year, and then they used like Noah Brown trying to figure out some other options. Now all of a sudden you've got Deebo Samuel operating in that area of the field and being Deebo Samuel, and he's allowed to be Deebo Samuel again. And it's just a great matchup marriage for what they needed. And kudos to the Commanders for going out there, recognizing that Samuel's available and recognizing how to utilize him. And they've done a great job in week 1 of doing that.
Do you have any fear? You talk about Terry McLaurin missing training camp, and a lot of times we see this with these guys who miss camp, miss the preseason. They get off to slowish starts, and then they just kind of come on mid-season. Do you think that if that were to happen, Terry McLaurin, just gets fully up to speed, looks like the player he has in years past, do you think that that could negatively impact Deebo Samuel later on in the season?
No, because I think that Jaden Daniels is an excellent quarterback, and I think NFL offenses can, especially on NFL offenses with quarterbacks like Jane Daniels, can support 2 wide receivers very easily. And it's actually a good thing that an NFL offense has for fantasy that they have 2 receivers instead of just 1 receiver. I feel like so often it's the thought of like they can only have 1 receiver because God forbid they have a second receiver they can throw the ball to. And what happens is the ceiling raises on the whole offense. The number 1 receiver doesn't lose anything. The Bengals have 2 receivers they can throw the ball to, and Jamar Chase had a pretty good year last year. So no, I don't really, just because of how complementary the 2 pieces are, their ability to play so well together. If it was the type of thing that like in Atlanta, where I think Drake London and Kyle Pitts, there's kind of a lot of overlap on where you want to use those 2 on the same
Mm-hmm.
areas of the field. Whereas Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin is just completely different on where you want to utilize those two talents.
And I'm glad that you touched on that kind of the schematic element of these guys being very different receivers. That's what I was hoping you'd get at because I'm looking right now. Deebo Samuel, his career ADOT, average depth of target, 6.4 yards. Terry McLaurin, 12.3. Like he's operating
Yeah.
twice as far downfield as Deebo is. And what we saw, especially in this week one outing, Terry McLaurin, his average depth of target, 19.3 yards downfield. So now I almost wonder if with having Deebo Samuel there, that they can just exclusively let Deebo be that underneath guy and let Terry McLaurin work further downfield for even more high value targets and really unlock a new ceiling for him as well. So, yeah, these are two very complementary receivers. There's almost no overlap in their skill sets. And I kind of set you up. I knew how you were going to answer that question. But yeah, I agree. I don't think that Terry McLaurin coming on later in the year would negatively impact Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, and conceptualize this on an NFL offense. Like, your quarterback has time to read one side of the field on most plays. The
Mhm.
idea that a quarterback is going to stand back there and go the entire field, that doesn't really work. So often you're going high low. You've got
Mhm.
the high receiver and the low receiver, and you're trying to utilize your eyes, your body language as a quarterback, everything to move either that linebacker or that safety, that corner, whatever is sitting there that's trying to watch you into moving one direction, opening up the windows to go to the other direction. And so when you've got receiver that is excellent at playing high and another receiver that's excellent at playing low, they naturally play into each other. Now you can create that conflict for the safeties, for the linebackers that are trying to sit in that zone and read you, and you open up your guys and you hit them there. And so I think that, like, think about this with the Chargers of, like, you've got Lad McConkey in the slot, Keenan Allen outside, and you can flip those two on one side of the field. The other side of the field, the strong side of the field, you've got you've got Quentin Johnston over there, and you might put your tight end over there, and the X receiver, like we hear so often about the sacrificial X, it's because you've got your flanker and you've got your slot that are playing high low off of each other, and your quarterback's looking that direction, and then that X on the other side occasionally, if the coverage gets a little bit too cute and shifting to the other side, then we're going to have this beast of an X over here. We'll get him the ball, give him the cornerback's going to have a problem with him. Let's get him the ball and beat up a corner while you've rolled your safeties over to try to attack the other side. And that's how it happens so often in a passing attack.
And that's exactly what we saw when Cliff Kingsbury was down in Arizona, where it was Christian Kirk was that high guy and DeAndre Hopkins was the low guy, and they would just make it so easy for Kyler Murray to just accumulate passing yards because he could just easily pick the guy that was going to be most open on any given play. All right, Jeff. Kind of weird order that we're talking about these guys, and probably should have talked about this guy before Deebo Samuel because he fits in with the previous guys we talked about. Keon Coleman had himself a very good week one, but I don't know if you heard, Jeff. He struggled as a rookie, so that's it. He sucks. His career's over.
Yeah. And had he gone one more pick earlier, he would have been a first round pick, like,
Yeah,
too,
so a second
which
round
would have
pick who
set him a
struggled as a
lot.
rookie.
Yeah.
Pour one out for Keon Coleman.
Yeah. Yeah. But,
Hopefully, the audience can hear the sarcasm in our tones.
I mean, it looks like things are clicking for
Mhm.
Keon Coleman, and all of a sudden, you've got this big guy that is Josh Allen's number one target. Josh Allen's a pretty good quarterback, and number one target there for Josh Allen. And I think so much of our friend Matt Waldman we both contributed to his roundtable, and one of his questions was, who's a player that you are ridiculously high on, like potentially over your skis? And for me, it was Keon Coleman. And call me a homer if you want, that's fine. But at the same time, when you look at the way the Bills are constructed on offense, I've talked so often about wide receivers and basketball teams, and when you put that number one scorer into a basketball team, all of a sudden these role guys can do their job really, really well. They don't have to worry about how do we pick up the scoring, how do we do these other things. If Keon Coleman has that upside to get there, to be that number one receiver, and him doing that, that naturally makes Josh Palmer into a very comfortable situation for him. That creates Khalil Shakir in the slot. Doesn't have to be the primary receiver anymore, which is a great situation to put Shakir in. It potentially opens up the tight ends for Dalton Kincaid. Maybe it actually happening for Dalton Kincaid. You've got the backs going out of the backfield, and all of that happens because you have a true number one receiver that dictates all the coverage that defenses have to worry about what is going to happen with this guy, and that opens up all the opportunities around him. And Coleman does have that ceiling to get there and be that player. And we saw it, especially in the second half of that game, and grading might say he was a negative in that game, but I think that it
Hmm.
looked pretty positive to me.
Yeah, and let me get into some of the nerdy opportunity metrics here a little bit, just to get you a little bit excited. 11 targets. I mean, that was fantastic. That's something that we didn't see a lot of last year. But two of those targets were considered deep targets of 20 plus yards. Two of those came in the red zone inside the 20-yard line. One of them was a design target where they schemed him up to get him the ball, and then 7 of his 11 targets were also first read targets, where like he was the guy who was supposed to get that ball. So not only are we seeing just like the raw target volume, but we're seeing design touches, we're seeing deep targets, we're seeing end zone shots. I mean, we're seeing everything that we want to see here from Keon Coleman. And we also like, Matt Harmon, I remember hearing a clip of him saying this like right after Keon Coleman was drafted, saying that like Keon Coleman kind of being that like backyard type of football player, like, off script, it meshes so well with what Josh Allen does. And a tipped ball that flies into the end zone that Keon Coleman comes down with. Like, is there anything more backyard football, more Buffalo Bills football than that touchdown that Keon Coleman caught there? So I'm excited, man. I, I, I didn't really have like a very strong stance on Keon Coleman. I think had you asked me like in the spring how I felt about Keon Coleman, I would have gone, yeah, not that crazy. And then when we started doing these startups, I was like, wait, what? You're telling me I can get Keon Coleman in round 12? And then when I realized how cheap he was, I started throwing third round picks out on Keon Coleman. And I'm just like, this guy's all upside. Like, this is still near a first round pick on a very good offense. And like, I didn't realize how much Keon Coleman I had accumulated this offseason, but he was just so cheap. Like, people had acted like his story was written already, when the reality is he is a young, still developing player on a good offense.
Yeah, and I think that there's and I've probably said it myself, but I think there's a belief that Joe Brady wants to spread the passing attack out, spread the targets out. After they acquired Amari Cooper last year, there was a game against the Rams where they were trailing. Amari Cooper got 14 targets in that game. And there were a couple other games with some really heavy volume for it was just kind of a one-off type of thing. But I think that Cooper, that trade for Cooper, and so that was his third game with Buffalo. No, that was deeper in the season. He was injured in a little bit and then came back. That was his third game after injury. But having that 14 targets in that game and didn't really deliver. I mean, 14 targets, 6 catches, 95 yards, didn't really quite get there. But I think that that's an window into them trying to what they could do with the number one receiver in this offense. I think volume could be there.
Yeah, complete agreement. All right, let's keep working down the list. And Kayshon Boutte, I don't. Do we have Boutte or Boutte? Because I remember I used to say Boutte, and I think maybe that was just the LSU next to his name, throwing a little Nollins on it. But I hear a lot of people saying Boutte. Do you know how to say this one, Jeff? I mean, I should not be asking you for name pronunciation.
No,
All
no.
right, well,
I said me and Alfredo should just have a show where I just say names wrong. Like, and Alfredo tries to teach me how to say them right, and I just say them wrong. Like, I think that would be a good little short that we could do. But I always say Boutte because the LSU of it
right,
all
yeah,
probably. But
yeah.
I'm sure that it's probably Booty then, since I say Boutte. So
Well, Clayton Gray, I know you're watching. You're really good with name pronunciation, so let us know. Booty, Boutte. Let us know in the YouTube comments too. If you, I'm gonna go with Booty. But anyway, yeah, looked really good. And this is a guy like a very, very good prospect who had some weird off the field stuff his final year at LSU. Also dealt with an ankle injury. This guy was getting comped, not comped, but like in the same discussion as Jaxon Smith-Njigba as the number one wide receiver in that 2023 class going into that 2023 college football season, and then really fell off after a down year. Ended up falling to day 3. We didn't really see much his rookie season. But last year, we started to see some flashes where it's like, okay, like that's the guy that we saw from LSU. And if you look over the final month of the season, he kind of emerged as Drake May's go to receiver. And I think there was so much excitement for Stephon Diggs, the big contract that he had, and Demario Douglas, the guy who was going to be the slot receiver in Josh McDaniels' offense. We were both kind of buying into those narratives and overlooked Booty a little bit. And here he is, leading the team in just about every single metric that we care about in week 1. So obviously, he's a riser, but I think the way I'll pose this question to you, Jeff, is would it surprise you if Booty ends up finishing the year as the number one scoring wide receiver for the Patriots?
not at all. No. I mean, the opportunity is definitely there, and I have to give credit to Matt Waldman and Bob Harris. I always enjoy the Feel It or F It, I'll go there show that they do on Mondays. I make sure to always check that out, and hat tip to them because they talked about Boutte on an episode right before kind of the season started, and that forced me to dive in, to look at things differently, to evaluate things differently. I actually ended up being the second highest ranker on him in draft rankings
There
in
you
in
go.
all VCR because of those guys. And so hat tip to them, and they really put me onto there. But I think it was so far under the radar for just everywhere, and so to see him come out, but it's really what we saw the second half of last year with Drake
Hmm.
May, building that rapport there with Drake May. And I think that seeing the thought of NFL offenses don't want to play seven receivers. Like they don't want to do that. And so having him lock in there and really block out like the Matt Collins of the world, and they've already got rid of Kendrick Bourne. And so Javon Baker is gone already. And so we know Jalen Polk's not going to be there. But they can go with Boutte, with Douglas in the slot, with Diggs as the flanker on the other side, and being able to utilize that skill set. And he can be the number one target earner very easily. He already is. He's the
Hmm.
number one receiver for the Patriots. And I mean, this is maybe it's viewed as a buy high. I would get him everywhere if I
Yeah.
could right now.
So I think, there's some leagues in your shallower dynasty leagues, like waivers have already processed by the time we're recording this on Wednesday night. Like hopefully you're able to get him off of waivers in your shallow leagues, but in your deeper leagues where he is rostered, I mean, you say get him everywhere. Let's try to, put an actionable spin on this. Do you think anybody's selling for a third right now? Because I don't think you could get him for that.
No, I don't think you can get him for a third, but I mean, I would give a second for him. I
So
think
that was
that,
going to be my follow-up
especially,
question. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm probably actually going to do that tonight. So if you're in a league with me and you've got Boutte, expect to get a second round pick offer from Jeff Bell. So
And here we are recording at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday night. The episode will come out Thursday morning, so hopefully you can pull off one of these trades before the episode hits the airwaves. But we got one more riser we want to talk about here, Jeff, and it would be foolish not to talk about Harold Fannin after what we saw week one. Led the team in targets, was on the field very often. I was looking this morning. We're seeing a little bit of a change in the NFL and some base personnel packages. And I think this Harold Fannin discussion is going to open up, some layers that we can peel back here. But we saw the Cleveland Browns play over 50% of their snaps out of 12 personnel. And while it's technically 12 personnel, we didn't see Fannin inline a ton. David Njoku kind of occupies that inline attached role. And what we see from Fannin is moving all over the formation. He took some snaps inline, but he was playing in the slot. He was playing out wide. He was running a ton of routes, and he's not running this traditional target tree that we see from a tight end, where it's just like, short little outs into the flat and little hooks 5 yards out. I mean, he's running big boy routes deep downfield with cornerbacks on him. I mean, he looks really, really, really good. And I know the athletic testing is what pushed him from the first round discussion in the NFL draft to where he inevitably went in round 3. But this might be one of those like, what were we thinking? This guy was a record breaking college athlete. Why did we overreact to poor testing when he was just beating guys like a drum at the Senior Bowl, looking fantastic at Bowling Green? And I think the Browns might have gotten like the biggest steal in this year's draft.
yeah, it's definitely up there, and it's kind of like Brock Bowers, like a discount Brock Bowers. I think that for so long, I think NFL offenses didn't know how to unlock these guys because they would get them and then they would try to make them into a regular tight end. They put them on the line and they would be like, "Oh, well, he can't play tight end." And then they would try to make him a wide receiver, and he was like, "Well, he can't play wide receiver." And it would be the type of thing like, we don't know what to do. So John Smith is going to waste 10 years of his career because we just don't know what to do with this type of player. And then you start to see like John Smith last year. You start to see Brock Bowers come and they start to get unlocked, and it's really coming out of the college game is where they're figuring a lot of this out. And I do think that there for a long time there was a mindset in the NFL when it came to offense that it would be frowned upon to look at what was happening in college football and to pretend that it could happen on an NFL field. And then I think it's just all been layers of the RPOs working at the NFL level, the mobile quarterbacks working at the NFL level, kind of these slot back receivers working at the NFL level. And part of that is these motion tight ends that you can move around, and you can put them at fullback, you can put them out in the slot, you can put them in line occasionally, and figuring out how those things work. Those all work in concert, and it really flows in together. It's a lot of way back when. Now to date it's a lot of the Urban Meyer offense. I think unlocked a lot of that in college when they had the Tim Tebow and kind of what Urban Meyer did at Bowling Green at Utah. And that's where a lot of it flowed off of, because previous to that, Urban Meyer was the one that kind of introduced the spread offense into being a run option attack, and kind of like putting that inside, because before it was Joe Tiller at Purdue with Drew Brees was kind of the basketball on grass, true spread offense. And even before that, there was run and shoot stuff. There was, Houston with David Klingler going way back, but it's figuring out how these different body types are able to work, because who did Urban Meyer have at Florida, played tight end in the NFL?
Aaron Hernandez.
Aaron Hernandez
Yeah.
was an Urban Meyer player at Florida. So it kind of fits like within, and I did in the article with Matt Waldman that I submitted today. I said that this is David Njoku and Harold Fannin remind me of Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, just of what you're able to do with Njoku being a bigger body tight end and being able to work down the field vertically and those types of things in the Gronk element. And then Fannin being the Aaron Hernandez type player, that he can be a fullback, he can be a slot, you can move him all around. And I'm very, very bullish on what I think is possible for Harold Fannin.
So, the NFL is very much so a pendulum, like kind of swings back and forth. And we've talked about that before. But I think we're seeing this change towards 12 personnel, and it's not just the Browns. We're seeing a lot of teams doing this. Not one team last year, over the course of a full season, played more than 35% of their snaps out of 12 personnel. In week one, we saw the Browns and Steelers both above 50%. And then the Raiders, Bears, Rams, Bengals, Packers, and Eagles were all above 35%. And these aren't all teams that have like a stud secondary tight end either. Like, it's just something that we see base personnel packages change every few years. And I go back to, it wasn't that long ago that 21 personnel, which like you never see anymore. Like, if you see 21 personnel, it's usually when you've got two halfbacks back there and you're trying to confuse the defense. But 20 years ago, every team had a fullback out there for almost every single play. And then we see these rule changes that kind of impact the passing game. And then we see spread offenses where everybody wants to play out of 11 personnel. And the way to counter 11 personnel is to throw out dime packages on defense. Well, now to counter these dime packages on defense that are starting to slow down 11 personnel, we're seeing teams revert to 12 personnel where they can move these guys around the formation, seek and create these mismatches. And it wouldn't shock me if we start seeing this just kind of become the norm in today's NFL. Like, fine, you want to put 6 cornerbacks out there? We're just going to have 2 tight ends and you're not going to be able to stop them. And I think we're going to see a lot of teams start going this route.
So what has happened to allow that? So you played high school football, right?
Poorly, but I did, yes.
And think back to your high school football team. What position did the best athlete play on your high school football team?
Halfback.
Yes. 20 years ago or so, or before, the best athlete, best player always played running back.
Yeah.
They always played running back. And then the second best player, you would put all like the second through eighth best players on defense. Right. Basically, you would be like, we've got one stud running back and everybody else goes on defense because we're going to stop their running back and we got our running back. And then what has happened now is, so Harold Fannin, there probably would have been a time where like the Harold Fannin of the world, they would have stacked 20 to 30 pounds on him. They would have either put him on edge or put him at linebacker. And that's where the Harold Fannins were previously. That's why not everybody could go 12 personnel, because they just didn't have the players. Mm-hmm. But now the passing game is such a massive element. And so like I coached flag football a handful of years ago with like 3 third graders. And the first thing that I did as a coach, because I didn't have a third grader, I didn't know. And I asked them, do you guys play Madden? And they were like, yeah, we play Madden. And I was like, do you guys play football at recess? And they're like, yeah, we play football at recess. I was like, here's the ball, go play. And I wanted to watch them. And what were they doing? They were chucking the ball all over the place. And I would see these other coaches, that the players were not allowed to throw the ball like in their offense. And we ran an RPO offense that I ran the same play every play. We were running RPOs with third graders that they were chucking the ball all over the place. And it was just because the development is so much there that this is what kids are seeing, and this is they're playing it all the way through, so that you've got these players that the body types that would have been a linebacker before, that would have been a fullback, maybe something like that. Now they've got ball skills because they've been playing in the passing game for their entire lives. And now you've got the ability to have them to play 12 personnel. I think that they always would have loved to have 12 personnel, but what did we have for tight ends for so long? We just had these lumbering guys that barely had ball skills, but they weren't quite offensive linemen because there just wasn't the elite players. Like Shannon Sharp was like 30 years ago, and every team would have loved to have a Shannon Sharp, but there was one Shannon Sharp, and now there's two Shannon Sharps on a bunch of teams.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, so we're just gonna start seeing it kind of move this way. So I've seen a lot of people like saying, "Do I panic about David Njoku or can Harold Fannin keep this up even with David Njoku out there?" And I think the answer is yes. Like it wasn't that long ago that the Patriots, when they had Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, that they were doing this, and both of these guys were top 12 tight ends. We haven't seen any team successfully replicate it yet, but now I think that with the defensive tendencies and the way that defenses are changing the way that they play the game, now we could see that happen, and it might be Cleveland, it might be Pittsburgh, it might be Chicago, it might be Detroit, but it might be Las Vegas, who has two very good tight ends. There's a lot of teams out there with two tight ends, but we see a lot of them in week one toying with this a lot more than we've seen in previous seasons. So yeah, Harold Fannin, a big riser right now. And Jeff, let me just ask you real quickly. This is a Dynasty show, of course, but I did do a poll on Twitter today saying rest of season, would you prefer Colson Loveland or Harold Fannin? And the overwhelming response was Harold Fannin. Obviously, not Dynasty. We're talking rest of the 2025 season. Are you there yet that you think Fannin is going to be better this year than Colson Loveland?
Well, I mean, the Bears are another team with two tight ends, but they also do have competent receivers.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I saw from in terms of usage and roles, I think that Harold Fannin will score more fantasy points in 2025 than Colson Loveland will. Now, I think that should you get into a situation where if you were to eliminate David Njoku and Cole Kmet from it, then that probably swings my answer, because I think that Loveland can handle being a more traditional tight end maybe than Fannin might be able to. And so if you're asking Fannin to kind of get on the line, those types of things, that would bump him down. And whereas Loveland being the full-time player, that role would bump him up. In their current roles, projecting their current roles, I think that Fannin will score more points than Loveland.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable take. I think the minor pushback that I might have is that I could see Loveland developing as the year goes on and kind of being that late season hammer that, even if he doesn't have as many total points, could be a little bit better come fantasy playoffs. But yeah, people are reacting quickly to Harold Fannin and taking notice of what he looked like in week one. All right, we've got a few fallers that we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about quite as many fallers
I want
as
to
we did
ask you a
risers.
question real quick.
Yeah.
I want a concept question real quick. Last year, so last year in half point PPR scoring, Quentin Johnson was wide receiver 40.
Mm-hmm.
If you had made Quentin Johnson's scoring per game at tight end, where would that be?
Tight end 9 would be my guess.
It's close. It's tight end 7. He would be tight end 7. So
Yeah.
Quentin Johnson, wide receiver 40, as a tight end would be tight end 7. And so that's when we're talking about Fannin. The bar is so much lower that if he is really like the slot for a lot of the time, the bar is so much lower. You're not trying to get him into being a top 24 wide receiver. The bar for utility is so much lower for a back end tight end 1.
That he could basically be the wide receiver 50 and still be serviceable weekly. Yeah. And we talk about it like that tight end 5 to tight end 25 is so slim. Oftentimes, more than not, it just comes down to like who falls into the end zone more often. But there aren't a lot of good pass catchers in Cleveland, and Fannin could.
And it's moving away from who falls into the end zone. And actually, it's really interesting because it's almost swinging the opposite, because what's Trey McBride's problem? He can't get into the end zone.
And I think Trey McBride is an outlier. Yeah.
Well, but what's happened though is the kind of the slot receiver, like Trey McBride's like the slot receiver. And so the slot receiver doesn't score a lot of touchdowns because when you're in the red zone, you're not posting the slot receiver up on a guy. You're kind of hoping that he can find some space in there. When everything's compacted, there's no space to find there. And so you flipped it from used to be these tight ends that were only hoping for touchdowns because they don't get the volume. Now they get the volume, but they don't get the touchdowns anymore because they're not put in that role.
Yeah, and I think Trey McBride, I'm not ready to make that comp yet. This is a guy last year who pulled like nearly a 30% target share. I don't know if Fannin is going to
We're
get there.
talking conceptually on where
Conceptually,
they're
yes,
used in
yes,
areas of the field.
fair, yes. All right, let's talk about some folders here, Jeff. Josh Downs, not good. Played less than half of Daniel Jones' dropbacks, or I should say, I'm sorry, ran routes on less than half of Daniel Jones' dropbacks. And I think this is a situation where we know he is relegated to slot work. They're not pushing Josh Downs out wide. He's not able to beat press coverage. Like they play him in the slot where he gets some manufactured looks and he gets some space off the line of scrimmage where he can beat his guy. But Tyler Warren does all of those things, and I think that he does them better than Josh Downs. So this is a big, big faller for me after week one.
Yeah, you talk about areas of the field, and from what I saw with Josh Downs, it was like a bunch of orbit motion stuff, kind of like jet sweep type. It's like basically like maybe a Marvin Mims type of a
I
role
was going to
for
say
Josh
Kavonte
Downs.
Turpin, where it's like, let's
Yeah,
confuse the
or
defense
like
by running this guy pre-snap and then getting the ball to somebody
Like
else.
Khalil, yeah, Kavonte Turpin or like Khalil Shakur is like the high end of it. It's when you've got a Tyler Warren and then you've got a Michael Pittman, and those players are going to occupy certain areas of the field that they're just better than Josh Downs when it comes to that. When it comes to, are you going to try to throw the ball 8 yards downfield over the middle of the field to Tyler Warren or to Josh Downs? I mean, to
Mm,
me, like I'd rather have Tyler Warren moving with a head of steam going against the DB than Josh Downs. And then outside, vertically, you've got Alec Pierce is excellent at that. You've got Adonai Mitchell's excellent at that. It's just you run out of space.
yeah, and we've talked about Daniel Jones, and now here we are talking about Josh Downs. We could have talked about Tyler Warren as a riser too. Again, I just did my rest of season rankings article, so that's very fresh in my mind. Which like not really redraft rankings, but not really dynasty rankings, somewhere in between. But Tyler Warren, I had no qualms about moving him up to tight end 3. Tight end 4 in the article, but that was before George Kittle hit IR. I mean, like he looked phenomenal. Like I went back this morning, I watched every single one of his touches on all 22, and I was just blown away by how good he is. I mean, this guy is just aggressive when he gets the ball in his hands, breaks tackles, and like they talked so much throughout camp about his hands, but it happened multiple times in this game where he was catching the ball through traffic. Now, again, how much of this is just, hey, they got to play Miami week one? Half of these guys are already checked out. It could be some of that, but Tyler Warren just moves different. He's strong, he's physical, he's aggressive. Yeah, I don't know if there's a player not named Brock Bowers or Trey McBride that I'd rather have in my team right now.
So you ready for obscure stat of the week
Always.
here?
It's my
So
favorite time of the day. What's up?
Harold Fannin and Tyler Warren set NFL records for the most receptions by a rookie tight end in week one.
Love it.
So seven receptions for both of them was the NFL record for most rookie receptions by a tight end's first game in week one. Because Keith McKellers from the Buffalo Bills, like back in like 1989, he didn't play until he played one game of his rookie year. He was a first round pick, played one game of his rookie year. It was like week 9, I think it was. He had 9 catches. And that was the only game he played all year. So that's the NFL record for most receptions
That's
by
the
a rookie tight
debut,
end
but
in
it
their
wasn't a
first
week
game.
one debut.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it wasn't a week. He's got the record for most tight end rookie receptions in their first game, but Tyler Warren and Harold Fannin set the record for the most game being in week one. So that's your obscure stat of the week.
And this just goes back to like the different types of tight ends. Like it used to always be just avoid your rookie tight ends. Like they are going to struggle. And the one that we saw in recent history that was kind of like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. You're a rookie. Evan Ingram, 900 yards his rookie season. But then you look back at it and he was a slot receiver that had a tight end next to his name. Fast forward a few years, Kyle Pitts, 1,000 yards his rookie season, slot receiver, played a lot out wide as well. Sam Laporta, his rookie season, finishes as the overall tight end 1, very much so a slot receiver. And then last year with Brock Bowers, also a slot receiver. So when you see Harold Fannin coming out here and just immediately taking over the game, you see Tyler Warren coming out and immediately taking over. These guys also are slot receivers. There isn't this learning curve of having to put on 40 pounds once you get to the NFL so you can block a defensive end and learn all of the pass protection schemes and all that sort of stuff. They're just saying, go out there, run routes, and we're going to get you the ball and we're going to treat you like a wide receiver. And that's exactly what Harold Fannin and Tyler Warren are getting. So I like that
So
our
here's
Josh
where
Downs Faller
here's
discussion has somehow
here's where
looped
it
back to
comes.
Fannin.
It's gonna come full circle
All
here
right.
though, because so that Bills offense was a little bit before your time, but
Mhm.
that Bills offense was called the K gun offense, and what it was no huddle. They would not huddle. The reason why it was called the K gun offense was because Keith McKellars was basically Harold Fannin before Harold Fannin, and because of his ability to be able to line up at tight end or line up at fullback, they could keep their base personnel on the field and go no huddle and give different looks. So it was the K gun offense, and they would never huddle for. There was a 5-year stretch or so where the Bills never did a huddle in the K gun offense, and it was called the K gun offense because of Keith McKellar's ability to play in the slot, to play inline tight end, to play fullback, and to move, to have that piece that moves all around the field and keeps defenses stuck in conflict.
Well, here it is. We talk about Josh Downs being a faller, and before we know it, we're talking about Keith McKellar in 1989 moving all over the formation.
You
This is
get me started on tight ends, and we're just gonna go on tight ends. So.
we got one more player we want to talk about here, Jeff, before we sign off. Another faller, Tyreek Hill. Multiple reasons. One, this Miami defense just looks, or this Miami offense, it was broken last year, and we thought, well, maybe they can fix it. They can make some changes here and get back to that 2023, 2022 explosive offense that we really fell in love with. But they seem even more broken now than they were last year. And Tyreek Hill, like his fantasy value comes from running these long developing routes deep downfield where he can catch the ball 40 yards downfield and then rip off another 40 yards after the catch. But he has slowed down. He does not have that same step anymore. They are getting the ball out of Tua Tagovailoa's hands so quickly that he doesn't have a chance to wait for Tyreek Hill to run a route. On top of that, we're looking at this story coming up from his ex-wife with some domestic violence concerns as well. So this is one for me. Like if I've got Tyreek Hill, take a third round pick, or I'll take a third round pick, and you can take him off my hands. Like I just don't want him on my rosters at this point.
You think you could trade Tyreek Hill for Kayshon Boutte?
Oh, oh, I would. I hope you could. Yeah, I'd do that in a heartbeat. I want to look through all of the risers that we talked about today. Daniel Jones, Deebo Samuel, Kayshon Boutte, Harold Fannin, all of those guys I'm trading Tyreek Hill away for in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
You're not getting
I think
Jaxon
there's
or Zay Flowers for Tyreek Hill,
no,
but all those other
obviously
guys
not.
that we talked about, yeah.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you try to
So
package
there's
it up for
actually
JSN, like a
say.
first round pick and Tyreek Hill for JSN, you think somebody might bite on that?
I don't know. After what we saw from JSN, I think that we're to the moon here. We're at like the Dogecoin point of JSN at this point. But
Don't say that because that
no,
insinuates that it's going to come crashing down, and I don't want to hear
diamond
that.
hands, diamond hands. Here we go. We got diamond hands on Jaxon Smith-Njigba right now. But I mean, you said pre-show that there was reports that teams have been calling to trade for Tyreek Hill, and I think when it comes down to it, for the Dolphins to trade Tyreek Hill, you're basically firing yourself. I think when is
Yeah.
really what's happening there with
Waving the white
with
flag.
Chris Greer, with Mike McDaniel. I think that for them to trade away Tyreek Hill, you're firing yourself at that point. And so I think Tyreek Hill will get traded. I think that the guys that would need to make that move right now need to get fired first, because it'd be a whole different conversation of you're the new GM, you've just taken over. Okay, now let me get this guy off my team and let's reset and let's build this, instead of this is the guy that was the skeleton key that made us a contender 2 years ago, and we've thrown it up and fire me now. So
what you're saying is the Dolphins are going to lose to the Jets this week. Mike McDaniel's going to get fired, and Tyreek Hill is going to be on a new team by week 3. Do you think that things move that quick,
well,
or do you think this gets stretched
if the
out a little
Dolphins
bit
figure
longer?
out how to lose to the Jets this week, then they'll definitely get fired because they're playing the Patriots. But
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah, they got the Patriots, the Bills, and the
no, they've
Jets.
got yeah.
That's right.
They're not seeing 0-4. I'll say Mike McDaniel's definitely not seeing 0-4, and I'd be I'm half there on him not seeing 0-2. But yeah, I think Tyreek Hill is going to be a Chief this year, is what I really kind of think. So,
And we have heard Xavier Worthy, they said that they're trying to avoid surgery. But what I've heard from the medical professionals is that like with Xavier Worthy, the plan, and I went through this, like, I'm not, an all world athlete by any means, but I had a torn labrum in my shoulder and was going through rehab to try to repair that torn labrum. And then at a certain point, they just said, this is worse than physical therapy. We need to get you in under the knife and have surgery. And that was after like 3 months of physical therapy. So Xavier Worthy, probably a better athlete than I am, and probably has healthier shoulders than I am. But that is something that we see often. And I remember Jalen Ramsey not too long ago. If you remember, he went through the same thing where he was trying to rehab this torn labrum in his shoulder after a dislocation. And then after a few months of rehab, they said rehab's not doing the trick. You need to go in for surgery. So they're saying surgery isn't on the table right now, but that doesn't mean that it won't be 3 weeks from now, 2 months from now. So we'll be watching this Xavier Worthy situation closely. But if we do see a trade for Tyreek Hill, that probably means bad things for Worthy's outlook.
well, but at the same time, we saw that back and forth game on Sunday Night Football, and so the Chiefs had Sunday off. They played on
Yeah.
Friday. Maybe they were traveling from their vacation in Brazil, but at the same time, they were probably watching those two teams. And do you think that the Chiefs were sitting there after what happened to them down in Brazil against the Chargers, saying we can beat these two teams, or we could
No.
could play this game right now, like play this style of game? No.
Now they're going to come out in week 2 with an offensive focal point, Juju Smith-Schuster. Like, I don't know what their plan is right now, but they need to make a change. Like, they can't just sit here on ice and wait for Rashee Rice to come back and hope that he's 100%. So I definitely see
Their
a
schedule is
splashy
brutal.
move. It is.
Their first 10 games is really rough.
And last year, I mean, we talked about it so much last year, but there was a horseshoe somewhere on Andy Reid. A lot of one-score games that they
Well,
were really able to get by
there,
with the skin of their teeth, and
there was
it's tough to replicate that year over year.
there was a horseshoe, or there was a narrative that somebody was
Eh,
pushing towards.
You're going to get the
I mean,
NFL
the
to
Bills
cancel
got
our
the
YouTube
first down
channel
to
here.
when the first, the Josh Allen got the first down, and the Bills beat them. But yeah, neither here nor there.
For anyone that's part of the NFL watching this show, we didn't mean it. We were joking. Please don't, send us a cease and desist and tell us to shut down our YouTube channel. We love the NFL and everything's on the up and up over there. But want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Jeff Bell and I, we're going to be doing 3 episodes a week. We'll be back on Friday with our matchup previews, injuries, news, and notes on every single matchup. Then we'll be back next week. We did the running back usage episode yesterday. Please check that out if you haven't already. Next week, we're going to be doing a wide receiver usage episode, kind of setting that baseline, looking at every single team. And then going forward, we're going to do running backs and wide receivers together on Wednesdays, where we're going to kind of look at some changes and trends in different backfields and wide receiver rooms that pique our interest. We'll be doing this show, Risers and Fallers, every single Thursday. And then Fridays, we've got the matchup previews coming your way. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on Friday.